Hey, welcome back everyone. Rob Marzullo here, Ram Studio Comics. So in today's video, I'm going to give you some tips on inking with the iPad Pro Apple Pencil inside of the application or app Procreate. And what I want to do is first show you that this piece that you're seeing here was entirely completed thus far in this app, and I'm even going to color it in this app so that I'm able to say, hey, I've completed a full finished piece using this the setup. So it makes me entirely mobile with my comic creation process, which is my goal, and I want to share that with you. So essentially, what I thought would be nice here is to show you the work and then talk to you and give you some tips in retrospect after completing the work. So, if you zoom in here, I think the lines are pretty decent. They're what I was looking for. And could they be better? Yes. I'm still kind of fine tuning the brushes, and I'll share my brushes in the link below or above or wherever it is as you're viewing this video. But essentially in that link, there'll be, the brushes that I've used exactly to, the settings and everything that you can get for this, so that you're using the same kind of brushes. Now, obviously, they may not feel like they react the same way if you're not as used to, applying pressure and getting your pressure settings and your hand just right. It takes a lot of practice to get this stuff right. But I am going to give you some tips that should help you with that. So let's jump on in and I'll show you what I mean. So I like to create a lot of layers as I'm working, probably too many, or definitely too many. But the main thing to note here is that I build up these layers over top, and I layer the inks, kind of an overlapping method, and sometimes merge them down. But I'll go ahead and take away the visibility on each one of these all the way back to the line work, that the pencil work that was originally created. Now the only thing that makes this pencil work look blue is this overlapped full flood layer of blue and set to screen mode. So if I click on that and I go to the blending mode, I go to lighten screen. So basically it takes that color, it applies it over everything. You can see if I take that away, I've got my regular pencils there. So that's just how I like to work. There's lots of different ways to do it, but that's the way that I do it. So then I start to work over top and I add a new layer, which that's that little plus icon at the top right. And you can name these by clicking it and renaming it and all that and changing the blending mode. For inking, you're not going to really want to change the blending mode. And then I've got this Rob's sword brush, and pen is mightier than the sword. I don't know why I called it that, but it's the sword brush, and you just take that one. And again, I'll share the settings of this with you. But the thing that I found when inking, let's just do this shoulder piece real quick, and I'll show you what I mean. One thing I like about the flood fills inside of this app is that as you're drawing, oh, that brush is way too big. Let me scale that puppy down. As you're doing your fills, you can just kind of do it in whatever way seems conducive to your workflow. Remember that 2 fingers tap on the screen gives you an undo, 3 fingers tap gives you a redo. So you start moving pretty fast as you're utilizing this. And also what I tend to do is I'll go through areas even though there needs to be a little segment of light in there. And it's real easy to come back and erase. So what I do, I'll just fill part of this. I'll go up to like right here, I guess. One thing I will say with the glass screen and the Apple Pencil, you're better off doing consistent slow pulls. At least that's what I've felt works with the way that I ink. Again, we all create very differently from one another, so you're going to have to test things. But one thing I've noticed that with this glass surface, that if you try to do a quick pull, you seem to get a little bit more of a loose edge, which typically doesn't work that way when you got a little bit more friction to work with. But we'll talk more about that here in a second. I just want to get this end closed like this and show you the power of the flood fill. You just drag that little icon. So I'm basically clicking that top right circular black color picker thing up here, and I'm holding it. So it's a click, hold, and pull. And I drag it over and drop it into that area. So a really neat way. And the thing I like most about it, if you zoom in, there's almost no artifacts that you have to clean up. A lot of these softwares, you got to be real careful because you can do this same thing rather quickly, but it'll leave a fair amount of artifacts, which slows you down because you got to go back and clean that up. You got to really check your edge settings to your brush, all this stuff. You don't have to do that here. So I don't know if I just got lucky and created the right brush or what, but all I'm saying is that's a huge time saver. Now, as I get in, I'm just going to skip ahead to like doing some cross-hatching because I think that's where most people would struggle using this setup. We're going to talk a little bit more about trying to get some good line clarity and things like that, but Uh, Typically, the way that I ink is I would just start pulling these lines like this. You can see I do not get the line that I want, but I'm basically pulling from the shadow side, and I'm flicking my wrist, and I'm throwing it like this, like throwing the line. And I'm not saying that without, a good amount of practice, I might be able to get that to work, but I found what works better with this setup is to actually go in the opposite. I'll turn the brush down a little bit more, and I'll start with almost no pressure, and I'll work back. I'll curve the brush, and I'll apply pressure right at the end. So all I'm doing is slowly pushing back, and then a lot of pressure right at the end, and then a little bit of curve. And you see that even didn't come out the way that I like, but it's closer. It's a lot closer. So then the trickier part becomes getting that first initial start of the line to be nice and pointed. And what I like about this method, you would think that, I don't know, maybe there was only one way to get lines like this, and with this method or whatever, this particular direction, and there's not. There's lots of cool little variations that you start to work into this. That's really the main thing about inking regardless. You just start to come up with all these ideas in the way that you can do this. And you realize there's just lots and lots of variation that you can apply to your inking. And what that does for you is it gives you this feeling and this style to your work. And then also, the work tends to not look nearly as flat. So you can see I'm not even hitting those exact lines, which I tend to never do that anyways. I think of those lines more as a reference point, and then I go for a different feel. And then I might come back and, maybe chisel out the lines like this a little bit more to the sides real quick. And then what I tend to do is I'll zoom back real quick, take a look at it, make sure it kind of pulls together. Everything has to make sense from a distance, in my opinion, when you're doing comics. If not, if you're doing any kind of reduction for page sizes, you can get an adverse effect if you don't pay attention to that. So again, I'm starting with a very soft, almost weightless push, and then pushing into it as I get to the shadow. So that's one particular way to control your line weight, and I think it's actually a really neat way. I don't know that it's some groundbreaking thing, right? Everybody tries different methods. I'm just saying, typically the way that I was producing my work, I was doing it entirely different from this. So this kind of I had to rethink things to get the lines that I was looking for. And that's kind of the neat thing about art in general, is that when you're forced to kind of change up your methods, sometimes you learn some really neat techniques, and that's kind of what I felt like happened here. So the flood fills are really quick. Obviously, you can just sit here and draw into these if you prefer that. And there are times that a quick pull is going to help, but what I tend to see, I'll show you the difference here. So I'm trying to do the side of the chest here. Sometimes I'll get a nice line, but there seems to be this little awkward waviness, and I don't know if that's in the brush or what. Typically on any other program, I can get this. Well, that one landed about right, and then I would just finish it like this. But I can tell you from that finished work you saw earlier, and you're going to see a time lapse at the end of this, by the way. I'm going to time lapse the entire process, maybe just throw in some music. I don't know if I'll bore you with my narration the entire time, but you'll see the step-by-step of it really quick. And it's basically this kind of slower transitioning that I'm showing you, but it was actually pretty quick. I think it took 4 or 5 hours to ink that. I don't know if that's real quick, but as long as you stay consistent, then you're good. It's a really, I don't know, I always think of it like consistency is a lot more important. Consistent output and staying on point is a lot more important than speed. If you get in this habit of like, oh, I'm going to speed through it, I'm going to get it down, speed, you tend to get sloppy. But if you're consistent, you get it done a lot quicker than you think, and it's this nice kind of melody to the work or something. I don't know, just this ebb and flow. You just got to get consistent output, not stressful speed output, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, so just do that, and you draw through here. But with this glass screen, you just really have to do like this nice, easy, steady pull, and you tend to get better lines. Okay, so that's one part of it. Let's see, another part is, I'm trying to find the things that are the most important. Okay, with the background, for instance, because I know a lot of people struggle with backgrounds. This has some really great perspective tools. So you jump in, and I can't find them. Where are they? They're over here somewhere. Perspective guide. You can actually turn them on and off visibly, which is nice because they're still there, but you don't have to look at them if you don't want. and they'll still function with the layers. Go to Edit Perspective Grid, and you see where I last placed it. I actually moved the perspective grid twice in this production because I did the buildings on two different perspectives. Same horizon line, but I moved the vanishing points. I'm not going to get too much into that. All I'll tell you is that you want to try different vanishing points, because if not, your scenes can look really kind of boring. And you know, with buildings, you got to think they're built all over the place, hills and turns of streets, and so they're going to be on different vanishing points. But you want to generally or always keep the horizon line in the same spot. So yeah, so I moved it over. So if I was to draw from this now, you can see it's lined up to these ones over to on the left side of the page, right? And you see it's not landing on the vanishing point. I intentionally do that because what happens is, as I first start to draw these, I'll create another layer and show you what I mean. I'll click on this layer. I'll put Perspective Assist on. You see it says Assisted below that layer 24. Now anything that I go to draw or ink or whatever is going to land on this point, right? So really quick and seamless, you know, just fast for creating buildings, right? Here's the problem with that. The more I do this, I tend to turn this off almost immediately. In fact, I think even with these, they look a bit too structured as it is. But what I generally will do is I'll throw up these loose guides like this. I know I did it to the right there. And then I shut them off and I freehand the rest. I force myself to do this because I don't want to always have to use perspective grids entirely through the scene. And I notice that they tend to it looks too rigid anyways. So I pencil a lot of it freehand with just a few guides to balance it out. And if it gets too out of whack, I can go back and use the perspective grids anyways. So I'll actually turn the grid right off so it's not visually obstructive, or you can utilize that for another reference point, whatever you feel most comfortable with. But then after I get that all in place, I turn them off. So I'll take this off like that, and I've got enough of my guides in place. And that inking that you saw, the entire end result, was all freehand. I didn't use the perspective grids once on the buildings. And you probably look at this and go, well, no, it's impossible. I saw those inks and everything looked pretty darn straight. This is why. Once you've got enough of that into place, you can pretty much fake it. And as you keep inking and nudging and you know, refining or whatever, that's not actually how that shadow would go, is it? Well, anyways, I'm just going to show you. You can keep refining it. And then also, Procreate does this neat thing where if you pull a line and you hold it for a second, it turns into like this. You know, my Apple Pencil's still on the screen, so I've never let off the screen. If I let off the screen, it's going to snap wherever I stop. So what you do is, the trick is you pull it, hold it, and you see how wavy that line started off. I can go like this and hold it. It's going to snap straight, and I use that to get some of my straight edges. And it may seem clunky right now as I'm explaining it, but you'd be amazed. This is a really handy feature. So you kind of are getting that rulered perspective effect, but it's forcing you to try to think about some of it freehand. So I'll get in there and I'll start drawing freehand a little bit. If I'm not really feeling it, then I'll go, you know what, I'm just going to use that snap line. Double tap on the screen a couple times like this, and then click like this, hold it, snap it into place. And again, I get that reference of the previous sketch to really aid me, so it's not a big deal. And I also got that ability to quickly close areas off, zoom in, and drop that little, you know, fill in there. And then I can come back. I always set my eraser to the same brush, the same inking brush. That way I can come back in like I'm using whiteout or something, but I'm just using the eraser. You see how quick that is? So you start to really pick up speed. I'll fill certain areas right over top of other parts of the art and then come back and erase it, or I'll create another flood fill of white. That's kind of what you see in this layer. These flood fills of white were so that basically I could just keep building up and not have to go back and re-edit line work or anything like that. So lots of neat ways to utilize that. Now another way that you can utilize this Snap To feature, because I find this one to be really helpful. Let's get over here. Say I did all these kind of freehand as I inked them in the piece, so I just do this, you know, nice slight pull. But maybe I'm getting a little too much waviness. Maybe I had too much coffee and I got a little too much shake in my hand there. You can do the same effect where you basically just worry about the pressure of it and not the straightness of it. Because you hold it, it snaps, and then you drop it into place. So again, I'm just focusing on the pressure sensitivity, which I slaughtered right there. And I hold it and I snap it into place. So this tends to give you a little bit too much of a rigid feel to the line. You want a little bit of that waviness in there. It feels more hand done, organic or whatever. But it's nice to know that that feature works even with pressure sensitivity. So then you start to really think about it and you go, wow, that would probably work with any brush I create. And the answer would be yes. So just keep that in mind. That's another neat feature, but it really aids in the process and the production of these buildings. The other thing is, in that end result, you notice there was some light line making in there. Remember that I just flood filled all of this area, and I came back with the erase, and not the windows. I went around the windows like this, dropped that fill in there. But all these little cracks and things that I wanted to see in there, I just came back with the erase. So another big time saver there. Don't try to draw around all those little separations and segments in the building. It's a huge waste of time. Okay, so next, what do we got? We've got the explain some of the texture or the cross hatching. Just want to kind of cover a few bases here for you. So again, you're going to use this light build up to the line work as you push like that. The other thing is really rotate the screen, get it the way that feels most conducive. Obviously, if you're used to traditional inking, then you're going to be very used to that. For me, my best line making is always a downward pull. So a lot of times when I want the most accurate lines, I get it like about here, and then I can usually get a pretty balanced and controlled line, that I'm trying to make. Just like that. And the other thing is, since you can't see this, I want to just explain. I have the device, right at kind of midsection to my body or whatever, on a table flat in front of me, and I'm able to put my hand, it's got really good palm rejection. I put my hand right on the screen, and I'm just working in a downward motion on it. I just feel that's necessary because there are parts of this illustration where I did work kind of sitting on the couch with one leg up like a sketch pad, but it wasn't the areas where I was trying to get the most control. Since the screen does have some slide to it, you just have to be aware of things like that. You do have to get as much controlled use out of it as you can. Later on, I'm sure they're going to make all sorts of great screen protectors. I use I think it's an Armor Guard, not Armor Guard. It's shoot, I'll have to look it up, and maybe I'll post it in the link below. If anybody asks, I'll comment back. But I do have a screen protector. It's a satin or matte finish. I know there's a ton of them out there. I would just say that mainly you should have something. And I'm sure over time Apple's going to come out with a lot of different tips for the pens and things like that, or Apple Pencil that should make this even more functional. But it is doable. That's really the purpose of these videos. I just want to show everybody that it is very doable to get detailed comic art out of this and be entirely mobile. And I think that's just really important for all of us to be able to accomplish. Okay, so another thing I want to make sure to mention is line weight. So, we've talked about this a few times on the channel at least, but a good thing to keep in mind is that a lot of times after I get a lot of the inking done, I'll go back and add the line weight. So I feel like if I add the line weight now, because I've done this a couple different ways, obviously, like maybe where I go through and add all the line weight first, I feel like it might not just give me the full effect that I'm looking for until I get enough of it in place where I can really see it. But the main thing is thick to thin lines, nice variation. So I'll add a heavy line connected to a thin line. And that's really not the only science behind it or whatever. I don't really call it science, but basically like here, I've already kind of illustrated it with the pencils, but I'll start off very thin, nice heavy line. Sometimes I got to pull it a couple times to get a nice smooth line. And I'm struggling a bit there, so I'm just going to skip over it. But keep in mind, one of the things that happens, I feel, within my own work is that after I start to get it right, I kind of stay in that zone big time. Like it's one of the reasons I don't walk away from a piece. If I really start to get into a flow of it, I stay there because I know that if I take a break and come back, I may have to start all over. So once I get my hand feeling right, I generally will start to pick up speed. But you see there, it's like this thin, thick. It's this bouncing back and forth that gives it more character. And then when you pull back, you can see if it really works or not. But the other thing that you have to really take into account is you have to get these fills into place. So I almost think that it's more important to spot all the blacks in first, because, for instance, I may spend time trying to get this nice heavy line right here on the dome of that guy here, and then I go to fill it in, and I start wondering, okay, do I want to leave this little glare of light to keep that fill? Well, I've already got this glare on this side, so it's going to look pretty silly if I left a glare there and there. So that's not going to work. So I end up doing the fills first so that I've got a better perception on what needs to be there. So I might take all this area. Again, you can hold, kind of click, hold, go like this. I'm just going to do this real quick just to kind of illustrate this one area. So I'm going to do it kind of quick and dirty. Hold it. You know, you got to be real choppy with your work anyways. You got to think about the beauty of digital ink is that you can edit so much. You know, there's so many different ways to edit here. So you kind of just want to fly through some of it and come back and clean it up. So I'm going to drop that in there. And so now you can see that heavy line weight wouldn't have made any sense right there. And if I decide to keep this highlight that I've got going right there, that's going to be the part that reads, not that line weight. So do your fills first. And then after you've got that in place, then you can make decisions on the areas that do need line weight to read. But again, you're going to kind of get all of it done as a once over, and then come back and add heavier bits of line weight, because as you're real close to the piece, especially once you drop out this blue line art in the background, you're going to really see the inks for what they really look like. And you kind of want to read it. I kind of like, one of the neat things about the iPad Pro, if I turn this like this on the screen and make it full size, it's about the same size as a comic book page. You know, some people might say, well, that's too small for doing the work I like to do, but that's when you do have the ability to zoom, right? But the neat thing is that when you scale it down, at least you can say, well, that's the size of a comic page. I know what it's going to look like for the end result. And the end result is very important. Now, if you're doing digital comics, I guess that doesn't mean as much to you, but for printed comics, which is what I tend to do and what I want to do more of, that's a big deal. So yeah, so do your fills first, get in there. The other thing that I think is a big one for people is, how do you get all these different feelings of texture, okay? So you see I've kind of got this similar cross-hatching style throughout Batman's suit. You can see I did a little bit different kind of thing here where I started to run some parallel lines with this. I'll show you that real quick. And I'll just tell you a little bit of what my method of madness is there, why I do it. So say I got this shadow that's right here. I don't even know if there would be a shadow like this right here, but I wanted to throw it there anyways. And actually I want this to go the other way because I'm going to go thick to thin. Oh, one thing to mention too, I also scale it down based on my comfort zone of my hand. You're probably saying, what does that mean? Well, what I mean by that is I'm not going to try to get this line right here with this very large. It just doesn't feel as comfortable to me. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but I may scale it down to where now me looking at my own screen, that's only about an inch of area, maybe a little less than that. So what I mean is I'll sometimes scale the screen to where it's most conducive for me to apply that line, if that makes any sense to you. So just be aware of that. It's not always a great thing to just zoom in on everything. But what I mean here by changing up the line making is that instead of doing these same kind of directional lines like I've done with the anatomy, which those are horrible representations right there. Let's back those away. Don't look at that. Over here I've got some that are going with the lines in I guess a parallel way. So that's kind of one of the ways that I'll do things. I'll change it up, say, well, maybe this area is a bit more specular. You see I kind of tried to illustrate that with these little glare lines, and then when it goes to color, I'll add a little bit different colorization than I will on this part versus this part. Okay, so these are just ideas in my mind as I'm applying this to try to get some kind of feeling that maybe this material is a little bit different than this material up here. Okay, then likewise over here, this I think they're called stink pipes or something. This right here, you see I got it all looking like battered and bruised. I kind of did like what I almost picture like what David Finch would do or something. He's always got this cool texturized look. You know, I try not to do it so much and feel like I'm copying somebody, but then again, if the guy's got a really great idea and the way he does things, you know, it is what it is. But I did remember thinking that when I was doing this. I was like, man, you know, what would David Finch do? And he would do all this, you know, gritty looking stuff. He'd have all these little pieces that look indented and, you know, these little imperfections, and the shadows wouldn't be clean. They'd be broken up. You know what I mean? So that's just kind of the way that you texturize something and make it not look, you know, I wanted the armor on his gauntlet or, you know, cuff or whatever this thing is, arm plate, to look kind of clean and concise and, you know, pretty in good shape, you know. And I want this to look tattered up and weathered. So I put all these little, like, tiny little imperfections. And, you know, just keep in mind that when you first start doing this, it's always going to look a bit like maybe strange or mucky. It's, you know, going to look at it and go, oh, that didn't come out the way I thought. That's fine. It's better to just do it and then learn as you go, but not conform to, well, I'm going to make everything look just like this because that came out really good when I did the shoulder. You don't want to do that. You're better off having variations in the look of the way that you shade and illustrate the buildings to his suit, to that stink pipe, whatever, you know, so that it reads as, you know, a more depthy scene. If everything has the same once over, then it's going to kind of flatten it out. So be okay with some of that stuff being imperfect. Imperfections are character. There's a lot of character in imperfections, so go with it. So yeah, there's a lot I could get into with this. Hopefully this enlightens you a little bit on some things. I'm going to be sharing more of the process. I think it's very empowering to use this iPad Pro and Apple Pencil. It's a little bit better of a price point. It's still pretty expensive, I know, but it's mobile and it's a fantastic device. I really enjoy using it. So I want to try to bridge the gaps for anybody, especially if they're like, well, hey, I want to try to use Procreate, but I can't seem to ink in it. Seems to be a common consensus with people. So I want to show people that, you know, given enough time, you can make that happen. So I'm going to show you a quick time lapse of this process being inked in this app. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. I appreciate the support on the channel. As always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon.